Hello, and welcome to this week's Spatial Analytics and Data Seminar Series. This week, we are very pleased to have Elizabeth Delmelle join us from the University of North Carolina in Charlotte. If this is the first time you've joined us, what we will do is have our speaker talk for about 40 minutes, and then we'll use the Q&A functionality on the Zoom to do Q&A, question and answer session afterwards. So if you have thoughts or comments or questions as Dr. Delmelle is speaking, please be sure to drop those into the Q&A. You can also use Twitter if you prefer the SAD 2020 hashtag. We'd like to see that. And with that, I'll just give a brief introduction of Dr. Delmelle, and then I will stop sharing my screen and turn it over to you. Dr. Delmelle is an associate professor of geography at the University of North Carolina in Charlotte. She specializes in neighborhood change and dynamics and also urban transportation, and sometimes both. She's published in all the top urban and geography journals, including Urban Studies, the Annals of the Association of American Geographers, Geographical Analysis, the Journal of Transport Geography. She's an associate editor for the Journal of Transport Geography and is also a former chair of the Transportation Geography Specialty Group for the AAG. So she's done a lot in both transportation and neighborhood change. And with that, I really look forward to hearing what you've been working on now. And so I turn it over to you. Give me just a moment to stop sharing. And the floor is yours.
Okay, let me see if I can get this to work. Do you see a presentation?
Yes, you're all set.
All right, thank you. Well, thank you for inviting me to this. And I must also give credit to my wonderful research partner, Isabel Nielsen, who's lurking somewhere in the audience and probably texting me frantically if I say something wrong. So you can also ask her the harder questions if you'd like. So I'm going to be talking about some research we've been doing recently involving text analysis of properties. And just want to start off with a little story on, since I've got a lot of time, on how we got to settle on this research topic. And so Isabel and I and some other researchers were working on a project looking at the impact of a new light rail line in Charlotte. And it was a mixed methods project. We were trying to locate where we should do our qualitative research. And we didn't really know this corridor that well. So the transit line, it ended at our campus at UNC Charlotte, and it began in what we call uptown or downtown Charlotte. And so as soon as it opened, we said, okay, well, let's just ride the rail and just get off and start walking around to kind of get a sense of where we should study the impact of the train on these neighborhoods. And so we were walking along the street right here and kind of looking at these houses that are a little bit falling apart. And I remember just walking and thinking, well, how do I know what's going to go on in this neighborhood? I mean, I'm looking at this, but I can't really tell. Is it going to transition soon? Is it in the midst of change? How are they selling the properties? And so that's when the light bulb went off. And so I pulled out of my pocket my cell phone and I pulled up Zillow and I said, and so the very first property, so Zillow for the international folks, is a website that has property listings. And so I was standing right here on my phone and up came this advertisement. So there's a property for sale right next to me, probably this one right here, the white one. And it said, the description said, this property is a builder's dream. It's walking distance to the new light rail station. It's quickly becoming a major retail and entertainment hub, although the picture to the right is kind of questions that. The house is tenant occupied. And so this was telling me, okay, well, this house currently has a tenant on it, but they're marketing it as something to knock down, to build up, right? So they're clearly advertising to a certain clientele who would like retail, entertainment, light rail, and would like to knock out these tenants and build their own dream house. And so I was like, well, this is a treasure trove. We can learn so much about the dynamics of a place, but we can't just observe from kind of walking down the street and studying what's happening in one moment of time by looking at these property advertisements. So that has led us on this story. So I broke this up into two parts. I'm going to start off explaining the rest of the story about the light rail. And this is a paper that we published in everybody's favorite journal, Geographical Analysis. And then I'm going to talk about some of the later stuff, which built off of this idea that keeps evolving. So to continue on our light rail story, we ran back to our offices and we found a willing research assistant who would download all of the property advertisements along this light rail. And so what we wanted to figure out is what was the role of the light rail in advertising properties, and then figure out what's the role compared to other amenities that might serve to change neighborhoods. So we got all of these property advertisements from Zillow. So that's the seller side of things. And we want to match that up with then who's buying properties. And so to do that, we got data from HMDA, the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act, which has an annual listing of applicants who are applying for properties according to their race and their income. So we've got this longitudinal data on who's applying for mortgages, and we've got the data on how they're selling different properties. And so this is just a map showing that light rail corridor I was talking about. So this is uptown Charlotte. This is the University City. And these are all of the properties that were sold from 2016 to 2018. So this is the period just leading up to when the light rail line opened in 2018. And so we just got properties that fell in neighborhoods that were intersected a half-mile buffer around a station. And then we took all the properties that were for sale. And then this is just giving you some sense of the significant heterogeneity along this line. So these are just, we took the property values for how much the property sold for, and we just interpolated a surface. And this is just showing that close to uptown, we have really, really high priced houses. My face is kind of covering up the legend, but they're upwards of $700,000 to $800,000 properties. And then in the middle here, they take a big deep dip, properties that are sold for under $200,000. And then as you get closer to the university, they're kind of more moderately priced, $250,000 and so on. So then we kind of made this bootleg map here. We looked at how often the light rail was mentioned in the advertisements. And out of the whole set of properties, their light rail was mentioned if a property was for sale in just 23% of the property listings. But again, it differed a lot depending on what neighborhood you were looking at. So this particular neighborhood, which will reappear again and again in my story, it was mentioned in 75% of the listings. And this is a neighborhood that we referred to as NODA in Charlotte. It's the most famous gentrified neighborhood. It gentrified long before the light rail was even an issue. It's not that big, it's just kind of one street. But there are bars and there's activity that goes on there. So this was a place that was already rich in other kinds of amenities, and then it was getting a light rail station. So that just made it even more attractive. But in those areas with the much more moderately priced homes, it wasn't that big of a deal. It was mentioned here and there in a few properties, but there wasn't quite the anticipation as these neighborhoods close to NODA. So then we looked at the most frequently occurring words according to neighborhood, so we could get a sense of what other types of amenities and how they were marketed in these neighborhoods. And so if you stare at this long enough, you can start to pick out some of these other things that are important for the sale of properties. So we see proximity to uptown pops out in several of them, walking or walkability, NODA, right? So if you look at NODA, it loves itself, but so does Villa Heights, which is the neighborhood immediately adjacent to it. Sugar Creek, that was the one that I showed you in that picture where we were walking, and being close to NODA was the major marketing term that was used. And then a light rail popped up here and there. So what we did then is we used this sort of as an exploratory framework, and we said, okay, well, we've kind of got a sense of some of the other keywords that are important. So then we created some variables to put into a model that we would, but first I'm going to show you some cool maps. So we took out these words and graded them in the model. But before we did that, we made these kind of cheesy word cloud maps but it really tells you a lot about what's going on in the neighborhood just by looking at the most common words. So here we are in Belmont neighborhood, which is the one just immediately north of the center city. And just by reading the most common words, I think that you can get a sense of what is happening in this neighborhood, right? You see renovated, you see uptown, granite, construction, opportunity, breweries, walking, custom, right? This neighborhood is clearly undergoing some changes. Then in this Villa Heights one, same idea, walking, uptown, restaurants, courts. This one is fancier, but being close to NODA and the light rail and breweries. In NODA itself, again, hardwoods, breweries, garage, which is another thing, but also being close to the light rail and so on. But then as we move further north along this line, so we have Hidden Valley, which is a traditionally kind of middle-class African-American neighborhood, these ranch-style homes. So the light rail is mentioned there, but so is, you know, carpet and fixtures and vinyl and being close to I-85. So it's definitely much less high-end amenities that are then compared to those neighborhoods close to the center. And then can't see over here, but it's just mainly mentioning being close to the campus and shopping and so on. So those are the variables that we took out, and ultimately we created a difference in difference model, looking at the change in whether or not an applicant was Black or white along this corridor compared to other neighborhoods. And so we took those variables out and we created a variable for walkability, for local restaurants, for breweries, for art galleries, and then distance to the light rail, which ultimately we did find had a significant impact in predicting that white applicants were more likely to apply for mortgages along that corridor after it opened. Anyway, so that's how we used text in this first experiment, but that left more ideas. So we were pretty excited about that. And so I said, okay, we need to get more property listings. And so what if instead of using those texts as exploratory words to then create variables, why don't we just cut out the middleman and use the text as the data, and use the words to explain. Maybe that'll save us some time. That was before I got to know text. And then could we use it to predict how neighborhoods are changing, and more citywide, what other amenities are important for predicting different sorting patterns? So that takes us to part 2, where we got some more data. And so we developed this framework that we think is pretty cool, for how we can both understand the role of amenities and predict how they're changing. So to situate how we were thinking about what are we going to do with all this text or property advertisements, we just started to think about this change in sorting patterns in cities, whereas in the past, of course, we had this idea of poor cities and rich suburbs as a trade-off between accessibility and house size. That would be these ones. And then more recently, we've seen that flip. So people are more interested in amenities, these creative cultural amenities, and driving back wealth. So we have wealthier cities and poverty increasing in different suburbs. And then, as was discussed in the first of these seminars, the proposed death or predicted death of cities now with the pandemic, that New Yorkers are fleeing to the suburbs. Even in my hometown newspaper, which is from this county up here, Orange County, New York, 60 miles north of New York City, I still get the newspaper in North Carolina. And I saw this headline, it's more hopeful, but it says that they're fleeing to the burbs, and they've interviewed all these real estate agents saying that people from New York City are fleeing up to Orange County looking for bigger houses and bigger lots. And so these are all things, again, that can be captured from these property advertisements. Can we try to predict how neighborhoods like those in Orange County, New York might change based on these advertisements? So again, we took our same 2 pieces of data, which are in more real time than, say, waiting for census surveys to be released to see how neighborhoods have changed. So we developed a framework where we could try to understand, again, the relative importance of these different amenities as they're advertised, and potentially to predict how they will change. So what we did for this one was first, we do what I always do, which is to cluster neighborhoods. So we developed a typology of different neighborhoods using the HMDA data that's going to tell us who's moving in to what kinds of neighborhoods. So based on the racial and income profile of mortgage applicants and the historical context of that neighborhood. Then we collected a bunch of property records for the whole city of Charlotte. And we did a similar exploratory analysis where we look at the frequency of words by these different types of neighborhoods. And then we took it a step further and we look at the relative importance of different words according to these different typologies. And then we try to predict what type of neighborhood it is based on the property advertisement. So we just used a simple k-means classification to classify neighborhoods. So I will explain what this busy slide means. So from the HMDA data, we know the share of applicants by race. So we did this for 2018. So we know the share of Black, white, Hispanic applicants, as well as the median income. And then we did the change in these variables from 2013 to 2018. And then we had the share of minority population in the census tract. And so we came up with these 5 classes, which we think, from having lived here for years and years, really describes the city very well. So this is Mecklenburg County, and the city of Charlotte is kind of falls within this circle right here. And then the downtown area of the city is right within this beltway. And I hope you're committing this to memory. The light rail line that I talked about before goes up here. This is the university. And then there was an original light rail line that ran south that follows exactly this boundary right here. Okay, so the 5 classes that we got from the HMDA data are, we've got these neighborhoods where we have majority white home applicants that are of higher income in predominantly white neighborhoods. So we can see that 75% of the applicants in 2018 were white. The median income was about $105,000. And well, that's that. The second one is the one that everyone is really interested in. These are the white home buyers in minority neighborhoods. So these are these neighborhoods in orange right here, which I just explained to you. We're following this light rail line and all the way to the west of Charlotte, and then a little bit here to the east. So these in 2018 had 67% of its applicants were white. The median income was not tremendously high. They're about $69,000. But we see over here that the neighborhoods in 2013 were about 78% minority, right? So again, exactly how it is described, mainly white home buyers in minority neighborhoods. And these are definitely the gentrifying neighborhoods of Charlotte. So then we have further out, kind of the older suburbs, first ring, second ring suburbs. These are increasingly Black home buyers. So the largest share of Black home buyers or mortgage applicants, about 40%. And there's still predominantly minority neighborhoods, so 65%. Then we have the whitest and the wealthiest neighborhoods. So if these are the white and the high incomes, these are the whitest and the highest incomes, and they're getting increasingly high income. So average median income, close to $200,000, and it's been on the rise for about $50,000. And the last one is the smallest group. So these are our Hispanic home buyers in minority neighborhoods. So you can see they kind of occupy a boundary. The gentrifying and the Black neighborhoods, they're, I would say, probably the most transitional. It's the most even spread among the different races, but the largest share of Hispanic applicants that have been growing. Okay, so you have to memorize that to understand the rest of the presentation. All right, so now we were able to secure some data from Zillow for all properties listed for sale in September of 2019. So we just start with this sample because we really want to just figure out if this was even going to make sense or work, or just we went with this. So that gave us a sample of 7,744 records, which is not enormous for doing some of the data mining that we wanted to do, but it was big enough to figure out all of the process and the cleaning of the data that we need to do in the future. So once we downloaded that, this picture describes my life of the past year, which is me trying to clean up a lot of text data, which is really messy because people use abbreviations, they put phone numbers, there's a lot of useless stuff in there that's not going to work. So it takes a lot of time to clean up these lists, and there's spelling mistakes, as I said, abbreviations. So just to give you a sense of some of the things, in case you're currently trying to hack into Zillow and get some of their data because you want to try this, some of the things that you need to do to clean this stuff up. First, we just restricted it to single family homes that were for sale, because that's what the HMDA data gives us, which was single family applicants for sale. So we tried to get rid of vacant lots, townhouses, condos, and so on. And those are just stored somewhere else for another project for a rainy day. Then we needed to make words, because when you do text processing, it treats each word as its own entry. And so certain words needed to go together for it to make sense, like light and rail, and cul-de-sac, and multiple offers. And so this was a very iterative process, as we would run some results and be like, which park? Oh, so we need to put the name of Freedom Park or Myers Park or the different neighborhoods together. So this took a lot of time it just took a lot of time. Then there was more cleaning. So then we needed to remove all the stop words. So this is just a built-in functionality. We then removed words that are common to all homes because they weren't particularly informative, like bedroom, bathroom, house. And then we removed plenty of other unhelpful words, phone numbers, the name of realtors, and so on. So we have this very, very long list of remove words. So then the last step is to what they call tokenize the text, or kind of parse each entry. So then that a single property advertisement, we just end up with kind of these important words that get left in. So for this one, it would be Boulevard, Charlotte, construction, conveniently, Independence, minutes, and uptown. Okay, so those are all of the words now separated for one listing. So once the scrubbing is done, then you get to reap the rewards and play with the data. So for our predictive framework, we went with this binomial regression model, and that's because it was the only model where we could get a relative importance of each of the words, which we thought was really important. So that's what we used. So we split the data into a testing and a trading data set. So then we can look at the coefficients of each word and determine the relative importance. And then we could predict using this same framework. And we treated it as a binomial instead of a multinomial, even though we have 5 classes, because it worked a lot better. So it's basically one class versus all of the rest, which I'll explain in the next slides. So the way that it'll work is once we develop the probability or coefficients of each one of these words, once you then have a property description based on the words that are in that description, we can come up with a probability that that advertisement belongs to one of those 5 classes. Okay, so here is similar graphs to what I showed you before with the light rail, but now these are for those 5 classes of neighborhoods. So this is another one that you have to stare at for a really long time to pick out the differences. But one thing we can observe is that all houses in Charlotte are beautiful. So that is a word that pops up at the top of each one of the lists. But if you study it more closely, I think it's behind my head. Okay, I'm gonna move my head. You can see, for instance, that in the increasingly Black and Hispanic neighborhoods, the fact that they have suburbanized comes up. So we see car and garage in these 2 types of neighborhoods, but not in any of the other ones. And then we see very fancy words in these white neighborhoods. Well, actually, hardwood floors, white home buyers really like hardwood floors, whereas carpet is in the minority neighborhoods. So that's another interest. So you can study this, but this is just the top words used in each one of these classes. So once we put this into the logistic regression framework, we then look at the most discriminating words that best predicts each of the classes. So not all of these words make perfect sense. And one thing to keep in mind is that our data set was not huge. So by the time we split it into the testing and training, we have about 5,000 words to do the testing on, or the training on. So we think with a much bigger data set, some of these things will kind of get washed away. But anyway, here we have it. So the first thing we can report is that it actually predicts pretty decently, despite the fact that we have a small data set. So again, given a property listing, we can predict that that property listing belonged to class 1, which is this white higher income, versus all of the other class, almost 80% of the time. And the words that are most important for predicting are the names of neighborhoods. So if you live in Charlotte, you will have heard of Chantilly and Ballantyne, and the first thing that would come to your mind would be that these are white higher income neighborhoods. So it fits exactly, well, at least my impression, of neighborhoods in Charlotte. And then we have words that are negatively associated with this class. So 85, which stands for I-85. So this is, again, being close to an interstate is one negatively associated word, as well as other neighborhood types. Class 2, so this is the one that everyone's interested in. This is the gentrifying neighborhoods. So we, again, get names of neighborhoods that are very famous for gentrification right now in the city, as well as parquet flooring, important for gentrifiers. And then we were able to predict based on, again, given a property advertisement, 81% of the time we could get that that belonged to one of these gentrifying neighborhoods based on its collection of words. They don't like foyers though. Oh, and just to prove to you that I'm not making this up. So if I just pick out 2 of the names of these neighborhoods, and I did a quick search until I reached my Charlotte Observer newspaper paywall, these are neighborhoods that are talked about all the time as undergoing gentrification. So white people in Biddleville, the story of a changing neighborhood, and residents face displacement in Belmont. And we would get the same thing for Wilmore, Sheffield, and so on. You have to take my word for it that it works really well. Then we have this class 3. So this is the increasingly Black minority neighborhood. So again, prediction is about 81%. We have IKEA made the list here. So IKEA is located very close to the UNCC campus. So campus goes up here. So again, these are just representing the geography of the city, which we're supposed to commit to memory. So along the outside ring of the city. And then words that are negatively associated with these increasingly Black minority neighborhoods would be the heart. I read so many of these property descriptions, and many of them would say located in the heart of Noda, in the heart of whatever this is, but they don't say that in these neighborhoods. It's not heart. So then, of course, Noda represented down here. This is our very white and very wealthy neighborhood, which we were able to predict at 87% based on a property advertisement. So here we get a couple of these weird things that pop out. Again, with our small data set, if we went back and looked, oftentimes we would find one property listing that had this, and it belonged to class 4, and it just became really important. So some of these things we think will just get muted out once we get more and more data. And then the Hispanic neighborhoods, these were the smallest number of neighborhoods. PNC is a big arena. Greece, we're not really sure. Leased events, if you read the property descriptions, it says, you know, this house is currently leased or formerly leased, but you can, you know, kick out the tenants if you'd like. And then hardwood and bungalows. I think I forgot that on the Black neighborhoods, we also saw custom, historic, bungalow, negatively associated with the minority neighborhood. But despite the fact that we only have a few of these neighborhood types, we can actually predict them pretty well. So almost 94% of the time, we got that right. Okay, so that's what we've been doing. So that was another exploratory data set where we really wanted to just kind of test out this proof of concept and figure out if we could get anything interesting from these texts. And indeed, we were able to pick out the suburbanization of poverty from words like garage and car and negative association with historic bungalows and so on. The neighborhood name, of course, is very important in predicting the neighborhood class. And we were also pretty impressed with how well it actually did predict based on this small sample size. We know that there are other prediction algorithms that we have played around with a little bit, but we don't have results today. And then this combination of classifying neighborhoods with HMDA, which is again up to date, so we can get 2019 data on who's buying into what types of neighborhoods, that classifies neighborhoods really well, I would say, compared to census data where you have to wait again until the neighborhood is actually changed. And then this combination with that and the text, it really picks out what type of neighborhood these are gentrifying. So now that we've played with this and we've gotten some results, we have identified a new kind of more legitimate source, property advertisements from a vendor, and they've got longitudinal data for multiple MSAs with millions of records. We just have to get some money so we can buy it. And so once we get that money, we hope to then look at the relative importance of different amenities and how they've increased and decreased over time. We'd love to compare across MSAs. And then of course we need to then find some smarter way to clean up this much larger data set. I think that some of these idiosyncrasies will get kind of evened out once the data are bigger and they won't have such a big impact on the result. But still, again, like merging neighborhood names and finding out these amenities and joining words together will have to be things that we will clean up. So if anybody wants to come do a PhD and do that for us, that would be great. And I think that's it for me.
Wonderful. Thanks very much.
Sure.
So Levi and I think has been kicked out as being co-hosts because my internet dropped. So we have this fantastic technological state-of-the-art talk from you, Elizabeth, but what we need you to do for us now is add us back in as co-hosts of our own seminar series.
I think I'm fine, but I do think when Rachel dropped, she lost co-host. So
yeah.
All right. So should I stop sharing and then?
Yes.
Yeah, if you go to participants and then under more for my name, you should be able to make me a co-host and I'll be able to show my face. This is a first. Every week there's some new. Excellent. Okay, I'm back. So that was fantastic, Elizabeth. I'm sorry that I got for a couple of minutes, but it looked like everything else went smoothly and it didn't interrupt everyone else's enjoyment of your talk. So we've got a couple of questions, it looks like, and I encourage other people to drop in. You also have the functionality in the audience to upvote questions, I think. Hold on, I can give you that functionality. There we go. All right, and I'm allowing you to comment. Look at this in real time. The first question comes from Dan Duncan, and he asks, I'm curious why you included place names in the data for the predictive framework. Isn't it sort of tautological to show that gentrifying neighborhoods are gentrifying?
Yes, we've debated this. The first time we did it, we thought it was important because well, what we saw was that neighborhoods that weren't, or properties that weren't even in that neighborhood were using the name of a neighborhood it aspired to be like in their advertisements. So we thought, oh, this is kind of important if we're looking at the importance or relative importance of different amenities. Being close to like another gentrified neighborhood or another neighborhood it wants to be like turned out to be important. But we have discussed whether or not we should keep it in the, it makes the prediction very good and it really picks out the name. It affirmed to us that what we were doing made a lot of sense and was giving us the results. But as we expand to bigger studies, maybe we will revisit this decision.
Yeah, I had a similar question when I was looking at sort of the words that come up, positive and negative, that it would be interesting to see sort of what sort of structural, so to speak, unspatial, aspatial characteristics arise when you take out the spatial. Although I suppose that things like even wood floors and bungalow, those are to a certain extent also spatial in the sense that neighborhoods were built in a particular time
Right,
and they have
style
characteristics. But that was sort of a question that I had too. Dan has a quick follow-up too. He says, sorry, a follow-up on that. The keywords for suburban/urban amenities clearly show your framework works. I'm mostly wondering if dropping the place names will say anything more. So that sounds like exactly what I just said.
Yes, it's a comment for our, we wonder what else would pop up once we remove those names. But at this point, we just finished getting results yesterday, so it's like a Jenga. We were afraid to pull something out and have it all collapse, but sure, we will.
Alternatively,
and work in progress is also really interesting. No, go ahead, Levi.
So something that I was curious about, kind of on that topic as a follow-up, have you looked at how often properties are sort of mislisted into an aspirational neighbor? I know that this happens a lot in Brooklyn, where sort of like gentrifying areas of, say, Crown Heights are listed as being in Prospect Heights right across a major road. So have you looked at that kind of thing in the data empirically? And is there any characterization that's sort of robust on that?
Well, the only time was when with our first study, the light rail one, we would just notice that like this is not anywhere close to NODA, but like I said, I think it's aspirational. And like they want to put that they're near these places, so you know, well, this will eventually become like NODA. And this is again from a realtor's perspective, when they put this is close to NODA, that's who they're trying to attract, right? They want people who would like to buy a house in NODA but cannot afford it.
Sure. Okay. Cool.
That's an interesting insight. So then we have a question from Sean Fox, and I don't see any other questions. So if you've got questions or comments, folks, go ahead and drop them in so I can get to them after we're done with the next question. The next question I see is from Sean Fox. Do you have any clever ideas about streamlining the data cleaning?
Well, for the neighborhood names part, I think that was Isabel's idea, where we could just get a list of potentially neighborhoods and kind of remove those. Oh, that was her idea of removing the names. I don't know. I need to learn more. I think we've just been learning as we've been going, and there must be smarter algorithms for cleaning up text data. But this is kind of new to me, so that's why we've been doing very manually. So I can take notes and say, we need to figure out a smarter way that we can just replace these things or get a list of different landmarks for cities. Because again, park in itself is not useful, but what park? So when you put the names together, that means a lot more than just being close to a park. But if anybody has any good reference or can point us in a direction, or like I said, wants to do a PhD and clean our data for us, we'll be happy to hear that.
Well, that's interesting because now we get a comment and a question from Emmanuel Trenas. He says, very interesting. Clarification, please. Are all words from the corpora included in the RHS of the logistic regressions? So that's his first question. All words from the corpora included in the, he says, RHS.
Right-hand side or predictor variables, right? Yeah.
All the words that are left after all of the cleaning and removing of the words. So like I showed in that little snippet, what was left was, oh, actually, yeah, because those are the only ones that we would have coefficients for.
And then he asks, have you considered topic modeling in order to cluster the words that appear more often in the same listing?
We played around with topic modeling initially, but it wasn't going in the direction that we wanted. So I'm willing to hear him out and how we can better hear what we can do with topic modeling that he thinks would be a good idea, if he could follow up.
Okay, so if you're out there, you can drop a further comment in here and I can either read it or I can pass it along to Elizabeth if she doesn't see it. Next, I just have a comment from John Reeds, who says, I would look to term frequency, inverse document frequency, rather than just frequency. It should help to pick out what's distinctive. And he says that applies to clusters as well.
Okay, I did read about that in my travels, in my journey. Yeah. But I will take notes on more things I can do now that our data is at a better cleaned spot.
No, well, I think actually what makes for the more interesting talks to watch sometimes are the work in progress, because I can see here from what's sort of rising up to the top of people's heads that they really want to participate. Do we have any other questions?
There was one question that was posed in the chat, I think mainly about using the model in a kind of outlier seeking or exploratory mode. It comes from Charles Morissette. He asks, did you notice an impact from keywords on how long were properties advertised? For instance, to indicate properties that were quite different to the rest of the neighborhood, rather than sort of predicting membership?
We didn't look at that at all. We didn't even collect data on the length of time that it was on market, I don't think. But again, this new data source, if we can buy it, I think would give us all of that information.
Yeah,
Yes.
length of time on the market is an interesting marker of a lot of things about neighborhood transition, but also housing stock and desirability.
For sure, for sure.
Yeah.
Or even whether or not distinctive properties like that are different or described differently from their surroundings tend to have a price premium or a discount. That would be interesting as well.
Noted.
Someone has something happening in the background.
Yeah, that's in mind.
Who's got the siren? I don't see any other questions in the Q&A at the moment. Did you have any other questions, Levi?
I did have the question about sort of using this in a sort of outlier seeking mode that Charles mentioned. And then I think as far as the rest of the discussion goes, I do think that topic modeling would be a very interesting way to kind of pursue the output of your model, because you might find that certain kinds of words, as you've done already in the kind of post hoc analysis, that you can tell that things like parquet flooring or hardwood or bungalow are associated with membership in a particular class. The topic modeling will kind of distill that into a kind of a cluster of words. As Emmanuel put in the chat, if listings from a specific neighborhood use the same language, then you'd expect them to be part of the same topic. So then you could map the topic membership and kind of give a example of what, say, a NOTA listing looks like. You know, what words are common to that kind of place lexicon. So I think that was what Emmanuel was going for in that, but I'm sure I can let him speak for my colleague can speak for himself. Yeah.
And we have just a final comment from Pedro Amaral, who says, very interesting research. Congratulations. Such a huge work cleaning such data as this. And I think that I don't have any other questions on here. I'm really interested to sort of, I mean, we could close out just by hearing a little bit about what you're going to do next, since this is sort of work in progress.
Well, yeah, so we really want to buy this data. I mentioned so this is from, I think, CoreLogic. So the real estate company, and like I said, they have data going back, I think, to the 1980s for the whole MSA. So we really want to get to this idea of looking at how different amenities have changed in importance over time. I think that would be very cool if parquet flooring at one point was very undesirable and then came back up as an example. And the same with different neighborhood types and different neighborhood names, if you could pick those out just from the text. So that's our big dream.
It's pretty interesting, the idea of sort of listing properties as sort of aspirational to belonging to a neighborhood, and how fungible the neighborhood boundaries are sort of over time. So I hadn't really, it's been a long time since I bought a house and did it based on sort of where I thought the house was.
Yeah, I did, when I was just kind of playing with our data set for Charlotte, I extracted out, I tried to see this extent of certain amenities. So like, how far out is the light rail advertised, or how far out, or where were schools mentioned, and then just map out where those popped out. On one of ours, initially before Isabel ruined it, fixed it, you could see that for the Black neighborhoods, schools was negatively associated with those, that neighborhood cluster, and a couple other things that were very telling. So I just tried mapping out like the spatial extent of where NOTA was listed, and then you could see that it's much larger than the NOTA boundary. So that was another thing I was just playing with, you know, what else can we learn from this data? So I think that there's still a little more playing phase to go.
It is very interesting data though, so it sounds like there's a lot to sort of investigate in that way, for sure. Okay,
well, we're just about on time.
There is one more question in the Q&A if there is.
Let me see. Let me just pull. Oh, yes. And I don't have the full name unless it's Obi. But Obi says, do you have a sense of the time frame over which these 5 classes would remain stable enough for the text predictive model to continue to make good predictions? Could quality of predictions of some neighborhoods deteriorate faster than for others? That's a really good question.
Could be. Well, the nice thing about the HMDA data is that it's annually updated. So the thing that we were excited about was like both of these data sources are almost in real time. So if you want to study neighborhood change and you want to predict, we just have until last year of the HMDA data. And when you combine that with the historical, I thought that this is a really good, promising way of looking at the dynamics, because we can keep updating that end of things, and then we can keep collecting the text, and we kind of move along as the housing market is moving along and the neighborhood is changing, instead of waiting for things to be big enough to change and you would capture it in like census data.
Ah, and I hear your co-author here says, one of our goals is to predict longitudinally. So there we go. Heard from both members of the, yeah. I feel like sometimes the HMDA data is underused in geography because it's got so much to it that you can look at. It's not only housing, but it's also place and it's also people.
Yeah, we definitely are big proponents of the fact that this isn't underutilized for neighborhood studies, especially because you can get this real time. It's another one that's not easy to work with. It's not like going to the census and downloading census tract data. So Isabel had to buy a whole server for her house. And fortunately, she was willing to do that and dedicate a room in her home. But it's very large data, so it takes a bit of processing to use. But yeah, it's free.
Well, this was really fantastic. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for taking the time, and thank you to all of the audience members for the questions and for the comments. My apologies for dropping out for a few minutes. I suppose Levi's apologies probably for the sirens in the background, but this is what Sad Funny is all about. And we do have, if you'll bear with me from, well, actually I daren't reshare, but we have another talk next week, Tuesday, same time, and I'll be posting on Twitter the details for registration. I'm probably preaching to the choir with people who are in the audience today, but we do pre-register for this. So it's super helpful if you can go ahead and sign up, and then you'll automatically receive the link for the talk. And that way you don't have any last minute panic hoping to reach one of us to get the link. But let me just close by saying thank you again to Elizabeth, and everyone have a nice evening and afternoon. Goodbye.
Indeed. Thanks to everybody.
Bye.
Goodbye. Bye-bye.